Well, my name is Krista Watkins. My maiden name is Ahrens. And basically, my family is originally from the Tacoma area. My mom and dad were born and raised in Tacoma. And Georgia came into our lives. We moved to Texas. I was raised in Texas, and I'm actually in Texas now. I'm in Waco, Texas right now. Anyway, Georgia came into our lives after my dad's mother died. She came into our lives when I was in 8th grade, and she married my grandfather. That was his second marriage, and she saved his life. If for no lack of a better word, she was a vibrant, hilarious, just spitfire of a woman. She just lit up the room when she walked in. She didn't know a stranger. She was just this magnificent little woman. She was absolutely tiny. She was but an absolute dynamo. When she was with us, she was just a force to be reckoned with. She had her very own sense of style, to say the least. She was, I've told Andrew this story before. I was up there visiting family, and I hosted a lunch and with my grandfather from the other side, my aunt, and she was there at my grandfather's house. And I had asked the question, would y'all like to live to 100? And my grandfather said no. He was ready for heaven. My Aunt Elsie said no, she really wouldn't want to. And Georgia was the only one that said, absolutely, I want to live to be 100. Which really pisses me off, considering, what happened to her. Because I know without a doubt that woman would have, had Cecil Davis not come into her life. Because this woman would not have known a stranger, and it is my absolute belief that she let him in the door that day.
So, before we talk about her case, can you share a few fond memories you have with her? Share like maybe 2 or 3 memories that stick out to you the most that you have with your grandmother.
This is she came down from my high school graduation. And she and my grandfather were sleeping. This is so horrible. She and my grandfather were sleeping in my mom and dad's bedroom. And it was early morning, and I had left my curling iron in, I think it was actually the morning of my graduation. And I left my curling iron in my mom and dad's, vanity, on her vanity. And so I snuck through the room, really quietly, and I glanced over at the bed, and I swear that she looked dead. And so I ran in, and my dad and mom were sleeping in our living room on the 2 couches that were pushed together. And I ran in and told my dad, I think George is dead. And my dad was like, no. And I was like, yeah, I really think she's dead. And so my dad gets up, and he's in nothing but his underwear, and my mom's in a t-shirt and underwear, and she comes in there. And by this time, my sister's woken up and my brother's woken up, and they're like, what's going on? And I'm like, I think George is dead. And they're like, what? I'm like, George is dead. And they're like, no. And so we're all standing over Georgia. And my dad's sitting there checking for signs of life. And we are literally all leaning straight over her. And she opens her eyes wide open. She's like, well, good morning. And so, well, God bless y'all for waking me up. Scares the living
That
bejesus
had to
out of
be
all of us. And we're all standing there in our pajamas, and my dad's in his underwear, and my mom's. And it just wakes right up, just straight eyes, just dead sleep. Scared the hell out of all of us. Oh,
I've been there before with Grandma.
Yeah, I mean, just scared the hell. And my grandpa slept through the whole thing. Nothing to it. But she was and then we went putt-putting with her. And my little brother, this was before then. He was just being cute, and he'd lay down and shoot the balls in like pool style. He'd lay down on the ground, so she'd lay down too and shoot them in like pool skews, thinking she'd just do the same thing. She was just that kind of woman. She just, oh, she was something. She was. I was up in Washington, and I was at the mall, and I was waiting for my cousin to get off work, and I just happened to run into her. And she was pushing somebody in a wheelchair. That's what she did. She'd go up there and she'd just go and help people. And so I started walking next to her. And I mean, it was just so hard to keep up with this little lady. And I'm 5'8". I'm tall. And here's this little lady, and I'm sitting here huffing, trying to keep up with her. And I asked her, I said, well, when you're done pushing this one, do you want to have lunch? And so I talked her into having lunch with me. And she always ordered hot chocolate, crackers, and butter. And that's what she'd have. And it's like, Georgia, don't you want something else? No, this is what I have. And I swear that's what made that woman so sweet. But during this conversation, she starts telling me all about her time as a high schooler being on the basketball team. And I'm looking at this little lady being the star of the basketball team, and how much joy she took in her athletic accomplishments. But she didn't only play basketball, she played baseball and volleyball, and she did all these great sports. And she was really quite the athlete when she was young. But she was just this tiny little lady. So I mean, that was right before she died. I mean, that was pretty well. Yeah, I think that was about the summer before she passed away. But I just am so thankful that I got to spend that afternoon with her. And that was just by chance. That was a total God thing that I ran into her. Total God thing.
That's
Total
so
God.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's who she was. She was just a kind, caring, giving woman. I think they have a plaque up, and I was reading in some of the stuff that after she passed away, they put a plaque up at the convalescent home where she volunteered because of all the hours that she volunteered there. She loved to dance too. One of the things I found out later was that she actually got my grandfather to square dance, which is just really, if you knew my grandfather, that's an accomplishment. My grandfather was not one to do anything like that, and to find out that she actually got him to go square dancing is an accomplishment. That's a feat. That's just amazing. But I think she could probably get anybody to do anything. She was amazing.
That's awesome. Grandmas can usually get anybody to do anything, really.
Yep. She was one of a kind. Truly one of a kind.
So, before we talk about her homicide that took place, I want to give everybody a brief little background on Cecil Davis, who was the offender in this case, this was actually a cold case for decades, and it was just solved as of 2020. 23 or 2022?
3.
23. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I forget which year it was, but okay. So Cecil Davis was originally on death row for the rape and murder of a Pierce County resident by the name of Yoshiko Couch, and he received the death penalty for that before Washington abolished the death penalty. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the second homicide was Jane Hungerford Trapp, and she was also killed by Cecil. He had stomped her to death, and he received life without the possibility of parole for that one. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that would mark two, and then of course he was suspected in your grandmother's death for the longest time, and I don't know how I came across that, to be honest with you. I did my research, and there wasn't really much on the case other than his appellate forms and stuff like that online, and her name was mentioned in the documents. So of course I asked him about Georgia, and he went on like a, I don't know, what was it, like 3 to 7 minute spiel about how he didn't kill her and how she loved him, and she knows, now that, he didn't kill her, this and that, and he was going on and on and on and on about why he didn't kill her, and if somebody wasn't responsible for her death, they would just say no. They wouldn't keep going on and on and on about why they didn't kill this individual. And can you tell the story of how this case was solved?
Yeah. It was really crazy because we got, and I really am so thankful to the original detectives, because the original detectives, I would, every year or so, around the time of Georgia's death, I would make contact with the original detective in the case and just kind of say, hey, is there anything new? Is there, any new DNA testing that they can do? And then, they would say no. And we kind of gave up hope. And then he put me down as a victim of Cecil Davis, an official victim with the state of Washington. And what that does is entitled me to know every move that happens with Cecil Davis. So every time he's moved from a jail to a different prison facility, I know what happens. Well, what happened in the state of Washington was that they changed their sentencing laws, and he was going to end up being eligible for parole, um, because of a change in their third strike rule. And we really went kind of, that's no, that's not going to happen. And we got pretty upset about that. And so I was talking to my husband about it, and he said, there's a podcast on YouTube about him. And I found your podcast with him. And we listened to it, or I listened to it. And I told my husband, I said, you got to come down here and listen to this again. And because in the podcast, he says, because the way you worded it with him, you asked, are you suspected in any other crimes? And he said, well, they're trying to pin Georgia on me. And then he goes back, and in it, he says, well, between you and me, I'll tell you the truth. And then he says, and later you ask him, how many have you committed? And he says 7 or 8, I can't remember. And he goes, okay. And you said, all right, you've got Jane and you've got Yoshiko and Georgia. Who else have you done? And he said, I can't remember the others. So with that, I called the Tacoma Police Department and said, will you please listen to this? And it was funny because I called the cold case and I asked if the original detective was there, and they said no, he had retired. And I said, well, this is going to sound crazy, but are you aware of who Cecil Davis is? And they said, yes, we are aware of who he is. And I said, well, I think that he has just admitted to the murder of my grandmother, and I would like it to be followed up on. And the detective there, he did his job and he followed through, and he is my hero. And I don't know if I'm allowed to mention his name or not, but he's my hero. And he listened to you, and he called in the other detectives while I was on the phone with him, and we listened to it together over the phone. And he called in a couple other detectives, and they went through and listened to it while I was on the phone with them. And they said, "Are you hearing the same thing I'm hearing?" And they're like, "Yeah, we hear it too." And so they pulled out, and I said, "I'm so sorry for what you're about to look at." The first detective told me that it is gruesome. I know the photos are gruesome. It is a horrific scene. I have been told it is among the most gruesome that you will look at. And he said afterwards that it is true that her murder is among the most gruesome that he's looked at. And she was, you know, it is bad. And she was brutally, brutally murdered by this man. And now they went ahead and put it through the new DNA testing. And through that, and through listening to the podcast, they had gone ahead and gone out and talked to Cecil again and interviewed him again. And after interviewing him and putting the what was left of all of the DNA evidence, and I give total credit. I mean, I have a friend who works CSI here in Waco, and I've told him, you know, cases may not be solved right now, but the work that he does is absolutely so vital, because you never know. I mean, here we are 30 years later, and the work that the CSI guys did back then was so crucial and so vital that it paid off 30 years later. And they were able, because of the technology now, to link Cecil to her murder. And it all started with your podcast. And we got him. And they were able to go to the prosecutor. The prosecutor happened to be the same one that had done Yoshiko and Jane, and was so ready to go after him for this. And then COVID happened. And it got tied up, but and Cecil ended up dying. But by the state of Washington, he is named as the killer for Georgia Louise Ahrens. So I give total kudos to, I mean, it just all fell in line. And I am so thankful to the CSI guys, to the police officers who originally worked the case, to the Tacoma Police Department that worked it the second time, to you, and to everyone who just absolutely played their part. I mean, it just all fell in line. And for years, I was just, it kind of was a bug in my butt that nobody was held accountable for her murder, and she deserved to have that. You know, she deserved to have him named. And he knew when he died, he knew on the day he died that he was responsible and that he was being held accountable for it. So, and that makes me very happy.
It was when you first contacted me, I was very overwhelmed, to say the least. Like,
oh yeah, I forgot that part. The first night we talked forever.
yeah, like, I'll be honest with you,
first
people
night.
contact me all the time with wild claims, and I no offense, but I thought somebody was trying to troll me online. Like, I was like, there's no way
I forgot
this is
that
the
part.
granddaughter of the woman that Cecil supposedly had killed.
I forgot that.
And then when I looked into you and I looked into Georgia more, I was just like, this is legit. Like, there's like, she's not lying. This is real.
I
This
totally
is
forgot that part.
blowing my mind, like it still blows my mind to this day because it like no, not trying to sound disrespectful or offensive, but I was not trying to help solve a cold case. I was just interviewing this murderer who is now a serial killer. And he spilled the beans unintentionally, I guess. I mean, I don't know if he knew what he was doing, because if I remember right, when he said he killed 6 or 7 more people, he was like, "Well, if the cops come and talk to me, I'm just gonna tell them I don't know what you're talking about," or something like that. And I was just like, "Okay."
And you said,
You
well,
know,
we'll
like,
leave that to the police department to handle.
right, right. I mean, Cecil wasn't the smartest individual, and from what I've read about him, he was mentally challenged to some degree. Isn't that right?
I think he played that. He lived, and the thing is, he lived next door to her in his sister's house, and he lived right next door in his sister's house, and he tried to say there that there's no way that she would have let him in the house, and I believe that he had already made contact with her. I believe that he had already become friends with her. I believe that she knew exactly who he was when he was standing at that door and she let him in. I absolutely believe that. And it just, he tried to pretend. And if I think, when you were talking to him, he brought up, you asked him about it, and he said, if there's anything else he wanted to say. And he said, well, about Miss Georgia. Because if he didn't have a relationship with her, why did he call her Miss Georgia?
I agree with that.
Right, 100%. And of course he denied Yoshiko Couch, like he denied raping her, he denied killing her. He said and obviously he was in possession of, it was like money and cigarettes and stuff like that, and I think he had said something like, "Oh, some white boys had taken it and I was holding it for them," or something like that. Like something stupid, like, why would you be holding on to evidence from a murder that you didn't commit? I think he said babysitting. I was babysitting this stuff, and I was just like thinking in my mind, yeah, okay, like,
What all
I'm
stuff
not,
was he babysitting?
huh?
What kind of stuff was he babysitting?
Cigarettes, food, and like not much money.
Well, he took 2 rings from her.
Oh yeah, sorry, 2 rings as well.
There were 2 rings taken from her that were taken to a pawn shop. And I can't remember if they were actually pawned or not.
You didn't get him back?
No, we were never given. And then my husband and I were talking about this last night. Now that it's a closed case, if I would be giving them back. Because I'm sure until it's closed, they have to hold on to all evidence.
From what I understand, they hold on to evidence until the offender is deceased, from what I hear, because, like, for instance, in like infamous cases involving like serial killers, right? Like, for instance, Bob Berdella, I think his nickname was the Kansas City Butcher.
Mm-hmm.
He tortured and killed quite a few men. Once he died, all of his possessions and the murder weapons and stuff like that were auctioned off. I've actually seen the chainsaw. Like, I've seen it with my own eyes in somebody's collection. I've seen the chainsaw that had bone fragments in it that was auctioned off, and somebody actually owns it in their like macabre personal collection to this day. So yeah, from what I understand, once the offender dies, the evidence can be released to either the victims' families or put up for auction to pay for whatever it may be, like memorial plaques for victims or proceeds going to the victims' families, stuff like that.
Well, remember, he talked about how much easier it was to do old people, and that
Right.
and he talked about taking the rings.
That grosses me out so much. My grandmother, I was raised by her and my mom, and my grandmother was a nurse for the elderly. She worked in different capacities, um, from working in a convalescent center to doing like staying with them, being in home care until they died. I mean, she would live with some of them for years. And the one thing I can tell you that I got from her was that people often treat elderly like they're just disposable. And so I have the utmost respect for those people, and that just disgusts me.
Oh, what we don't know are the others. And there are others that he did.
How many do we think he did?
He says that he did 7 or 8. What did he say? 7 or 8? I can't remember.
Yeah, I believe he did say 7 or 8, and he told me at a later time that well,
because you called him again, trying to
right. Well, yeah, he had called me again, and so the first time the first interview I did with him was for Criminal Perspective, but the audio was so terrible that we weren't able to use it, and he denied killing any other people. But then other times he said that he killed 6 or 7 people and they were in a retirement home, and he would deny any knowledge of these murders if he was to be visited by law enforcement or detectives or anything like that. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, do you not realize these prison phone calls are being recorded? Like, they're recorded for a reason. But like I said, he wasn't the smartest, dude. I mean, he wasn't super dumb by any means, but he wasn't very smart, if that makes sense. So 3 confirmed victims, Georgia, Yoshiko, and Jane for sure. And they're more, I mean, I'd be willing to bet my life on it that there's more victims out there that haven't been discovered or are just cold cases sitting in a file drawer, just waiting to be solved. And unfortunately, since he's gone now, I don't think that's possible unless they have partial DNA or fingerprints or anything that they just haven't retested, since their cold cases.
Right.
But let's go one past these phone calls being recorded, because I will tell you one of the things that I've seen happen also is not necessarily just those phone calls. Some people think they're slick using like the jailbroken tablets and things like that, but it's about who you're saying things around too.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you've got people who will rat you out so quick just to be able to get something for themselves.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Wow.
And ironically, he ratted himself out. And what's crazy is he called me a day before he died. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, less than 24 hours before he passed away, it was like, you have a prepaid call from Cecil Davis. And I'm just like, he would call me a lot. He was like Joshua Rudiger. He would call and call and call and call and call and call. Then I finally had to tell him, like, you need to stop calling me so many times. Like, if I don't pick up after 3 times, please stop calling me, because I'm busy. Like, I have a 9 to 5. I'm working. I can't talk to you all the time. And because at one point he told me he had a friend in there that was a convicted murderer, but he would do an interview with me if I paid him $500 up front. And I was like, Cecil, thank you, but no thank you. I don't pay for interviews. And I'm not really interested. So he called me the day before he passed away. And if I would have known he was dying, I would have taken it. And like Krista said a few days ago on Messenger, he probably was calling me to like scold me or yell at me that I quote unquote ratted him out. But in reality, I didn't do a damn thing other than record an interview with him confessing to a cold case homicide. And I don't think he realized that what he was doing, but he did it. You know what I mean?
Oh, I tell everybody, give a fool a platform and they'll tell on themselves, and they will.
I think he just wanted to talk. I mean, I'm serious. When we sat there and listened to it the first night, and because we had nothing, and in all of those years, it was dead silence from him. And just, I mean, I was I was told literally that I could go to his execution if I wanted to before they abolished the death penalty there. And that's what I was expecting to get to do. And we had nothing. And when we listened to that the first time, my jaw dropped, and I called Chris down from upstairs and I said, "You got to come listen to this." And then I called you. Or I think I messaged you or something. I don't remember if it was Messenger. And then we
Right.
ended
Yeah,
up,
you did message me first, and then we spoke on the phone after that.
and then I think we were up until like 3 a.m. and
Yeah.
talking till like 3 a.m. And then I was just like freaking out because he actually admitted it. I mean, he like actually admitted to killing her. And I was just, it was just like, it was an admission, and the police agreed. They agreed that it was pretty much as close to a confession as you can get, and without actually fully saying I did it. And in their eyes, it was close enough. So it really, for our family, it has, to have the state follow through with it, and after 30 years, I mean, literally 30-year cold case, is amazing.
So here's my question for you, because it wasn't something that was, closed out through any kind of definitive, DNA and stuff like that. Initially, it was something where did it feel okay to you? I mean, did you feel like justice had been served even if that hadn't been available? In other words, did you trust what he was saying?
Did I trust what the police officer told me?
No, Cecil.
Oh yeah, when he was talking about what he said on the with Andrew.
Yeah. So like, did it just click to you and go, oh yes, this is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because he came back, and when you listen to it, and he's talking about it, and when he came back to it, and when it clicked with me, was because he came back and said Miss Georgia. And the minute he said Miss Georgia, I said, he's guilty as hell.
How much younger was he than her?
Oh, way younger.
Okay. Yeah, that Miss Georgia thing makes sense then, because even if I have students now, I'm a professor, by the way. If I have students that are older than me, I always call them Miss, whoever, because that's what I've been taught.
In my mind, that meant he had a relationship with her before she died.
Yeah.
If he's calling her Miss Georgia, he had already known her. He had met her. He had been given her paper. And I think at one point he said he had given her papers, right?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. And Georgia was 80 years old. Cecil must have been what, in his late 20s to mid 30s?
Yeah, because he killed her before. This was in 93 when he killed Georgia. She was first. She was before the other murders.
Oh, wow.
She was in 1993. She was killed 2 weeks before my first wedding. My wedding invitation was sitting on the mantle when he killed her.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
That is terrible. It's terrible anyhow, but then.
I know, you think of that. I mean, she had my wedding invitation up on the mantle when he murdered her.
Oh, yeah, because I can imagine my grandma would have been like, nothing can stop me from going to something like that.
It's just like it just the little things, you think of. And she, her, I was thinking about this earlier, her house, if you watch Everybody Loves Raymond, and her house was like Marie's. She had, the plastic on the couch, the old TV, and the old radio, and the old TV.
Was it floral?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it was. And but it was small, but it was it was quaint, and but it was homey, and it
was grandma's.
Yeah, and it just it angers me. Oh, it just angers me to know what he did to her. It just angers me, but it does make me so happy that it did end up the way it did. But like I said, I absolutely did believe when you hear and listen to and go back, and I did go back and listen to it the other day, listen to the podcast again. And when he says Miss Georgia, that was when I knew he was guilty. And because he went back and because you asked him, is there anything else you want to add? And he goes, about Miss Georgia. And that's what he wanted to talk about, was Miss Georgia. That's what he was on his mind, was Miss Georgia.
That's just terrible.
Well, he's a serial killer, and that's
Right.
what made him a serial killer. And I guess that brings, and I didn't realize that what her being guilty of her death was what put him in the serial killer category, which I don't know if that is something good or bad, but gives him notoriety. What he's an evil man. I do know that when I talked to the first detective, I at one point really had a desire to go talk to him. And when I was younger, I really wanted to look him in the face and just talk to him. And when the detective told me, he said he's just pure evil. He's just pure evil. And he said that his sister was afraid of him and that she felt like the sister was covering for him and knew more than what she was saying about that night, and that she was afraid, and that he was hoping that after he was dead that she would come clean about what really happened. But
did she?
Nope, not yet.
I
don't even know if she's still alive. I don't know if she's still alive or not. But it was such a, with him living right next door. And I even think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a news footage, and I don't know, and I can't say for 100% sure, that there's a news clip of him hanging on the fence talking about what a great neighbor she is.
Wow, that's so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but I can tell you that.
Go ahead.
I was just going to tell you that, my grandmas and grandpas are so important to us, and I am so sorry for your loss, but I'm so glad that you got answers finally.
Yeah. And she's somebody, like I said, she came into it was funny because we knew nothing about her. We absolutely knew, my first grandmother was she was Martha Stewart. She was the first Martha Stewart. She was this amazing woman who did everything. She was your quintessential grandma. She was just this amazing woman who she cooked. She had garden. She had everything. She was literally like the most amazing woman. And after she died, my grandpa just went into this. He was a manic depressive. And I don't know how much longer he really would have survived had Georgia not come into his life. And when I was, like I said, in 8th grade, I was about to be confirmed, and I had sent my grandpa the invitation for my confirmation, and I got a letter back. And it says, "Dear Krista, I'm sorry I can't attend your graduation because I'm getting married that weekend." And I'm like, what? And I go in and I say, "Dad, Grandpa can't come to my confirmation because he's getting married." My dad's like, "What?" So he calls my aunt and finds out that Grandpa has apparently been dating Georgia, and they're getting married the same weekend that I had my confirmation.
Wow.
So that's how we found out about Georgia Louise. And it went on from there. And she was nothing but a joy ever since. So
Wow. That's amazing though. I'm glad
yeah.
you had time with her.
And she was, like I said, she was nothing but, she was her own, and she was a one of a kind. She was a one of a kind. And she would have lived to 100, like I said, had that man not walked into her life. And like I said, I do believe that absolutely 100% that he had a relationship with her before he walked in that door. And I think that I truly believe he walked up to that door and walked right in and pushed her through that house and into that bedroom.
Absolutely terrible.
And he lied, and he absolutely did that. And it was as horrific as the other ones. What gets me is that, I don't know if you listen to that he wasn't even sorry for in the trap, because and he still wasn't sorry about what he did, and felt like she deserved it.
I'm not surprised.
Because she didn't perform for him.
Right. Yeah, that's what made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was just like thinking to myself, are you kidding me?
I mean, that just still blows my mind. He still, to this day, and up until his dying day, believed that it was okay. He's a sick man. Sick man. And like I said, what I'm curious about, because he talked about, like killing older people, what kind of access did he have to elderly people? I mean, if he was around a nursing home, and if he was an attendant or worked as an aide of any kind, was he killing them in their sleep? Was he, and they just were written off as deaths, you know?
It's a very good question.
That people knew but didn't,
Do you know what he was doing, Andrew?
I honestly don't know, but I was gonna say, um, I was gonna mention, I don't know if either of you know who Billy Shamir is, but he was from Kenya. I believe he was from Kenya. He's labeled the pillowcase murderer, and he was murdered in prison last year. He killed upwards of hundreds of elderly women, and unfortunately, after he was convicted of 2 homicides, the detectives dropped the ball and were like, "Well, he's doing life in prison. We're no longer gonna pursue any other cases against him." And this kind of sounds similar to what Cecil did to Georgia, because this guy was literally killing elderly women, and they were classified as natural cause deaths. Like the retirement homes and everything are being sued out the ass by the victims' families, and I'm glad that they are. I hope they go under, and I hope all of them lose their licenses, lose their jobs, and everything. But
I
this
don't
could
think
have been
Cecil could have done it without being brutal, though.
right,
All
right.
of his were so brutal. I mean, just so brutal.
Right, and I mean, I guess it's possible that he could have killed other elderly women in either non I'm not gonna say nonviolent, because a murder is violent no matter what happens to somebody, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
he could have easily smothered them or stabbed them or even pushed them down or something like that. Because when you're elderly, you're fragile. If you fall, like, I remember my grandma fell one time, and I think she broke her leg or something like that, and she never really fully healed from it up until
Yeah.
she passed away. And when you're elderly, you break a bone, you break a finger or something like that, you're never going to heal. That's why they always tell you to be cautious when performing CPR on somebody that's elderly, because you're going to break their ribs, or break bones and they're not going to heal properly, and it's up to you whether you want them to be in pain for the rest of their life until they pass away, you know. So it's I would be curious. I'm going to dig more into Cecil's past and see what he did as a living, if he did anything for a living. I mean, it could have been possible his mom was in an elderly home or something like that, and he visited her and picked his victims that way. I mean, there's a million different possibilities on how he got close to the elderly population.
It's just the comment that he made about that doing elderly people was easier.
Right, right. Which makes me wonder if he was like a healthcare worker or he had somebody, had a quote unquote loved one in a facility that he was visiting and possibly was picking off people that he knew like had no family or knew that they were old and close to passing away or something like that, which is beyond sick. I mean, I think the worst thing you can do when it comes to murder is kill children, babies, and the elderly because they're innocent and they can't fight back for the most part, you know, and it's just mind blowing that people can kill those types of populations with no reason or whatever, you know, like I'm just gonna do this and get away with it and take their jewelry or just do it for fun. It's just it's sick and it's mind blowing to me.
I do know that at the time I had asked the detective that worked it now if they were going to cross check Cecil to any other unsolved cases. And they said yes, that they were going to do that. And so far, they had not linked him to anything else.
What about his sister? Could she have possibly worked somewhere too where he was like, visiting her? Like, hey, I'm stopping by for lunch and, getting to make relationships with people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very possible.
I mean, he had access to a lot of things and he was always on drugs and high is what his excuse was.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can't find his sister if she's still alive because I would love to talk to her. If I remember right, his mom was alive a few years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, before I did the Unforbidden Truth
I know
interview
the
with him.
sister was absolutely terrified of him.
Yeah, yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine anybody in his life was terrified of him because he is a scary guy, and I mean, I don't know if you've seen the photo of him flexing in prison, but he was like a pretty muscular dude too. So, I mean, being muscular and being like a psychopath or sociopath, I would be terrified of him.
Did you say what did he die of?
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. It was never. I don't think it was ever published. But if I was to be a betting man, I would bet that it was COVID or something like that. I want to say he was in a wheelchair. Yeah, he was in a wheelchair because he was talking about there was a white guy one time that was messing with him in his wheelchair one time, and he kept pushing him around and kicking the wheelchair and everything. And he told me that he was trying to get this man to stop leaving him alone. He claimed he was an AB, like an Aryan Brotherhood member, which is like a racist skinhead gang in prison. And I remember him saying that he didn't like being on the phone that often because he had to be around all the white guys, and they just terrified him, and he thought that they were going to kill him or beat him up or something like that. And he was like, I'm already in a wheelchair. I don't want to be in more pain or whatever than I already am now.
Oh,
poor guy.
And I know he did have a catheter too. I remember him telling me that. So I know he had all sorts of things wrong with him, and he actually told me that he was trying to get a compassionate release, which I just thought was laughable.
In Texas, he had already been dead.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely. He would have got the death penalty for sure in Texas for Yoshiko, let alone Jane Hungerford Trapp. Like, they don't play in Texas.
No, we don't. We don't. And here's the thing. I watch. I followed the Daybell trial, and they had this guy on the other night, and he was bashing Texas and our death penalty system. And I was like, dude, let me tell you, I don't care. It may take y'all 30 years, but we're getting it done. And Don't be bashing us.
Right. There's some people that have been on death row for like 30 plus years, like you said, 40 plus years. Like I know a serial killer by the name of David Gore. He was on Florida's death row for the longest time, and what got him killed was there was a book or something like that that had letters published about him bragging about his crimes or something like that. And when they found out about that, he was on the short list of executions, and he died shortly, after that. So I
I
know it.
know a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about the death penalty. I understand that. And I totally get that. But until you have been in the shoes of someone who has had somebody murdered in your family, and you have had somebody brutally murdered the way Georgia was, you might change your opinion on it. And I understand that there are people against it, and there are people who think we do it the wrong way. But I think that in the case of Cecil, he absolutely deserved it. And when we found out that they had abolished it, I can't say that, I was very happy that I was invited to go. And I would have gone had I been given the opportunity to go. And that may sound morbid, that may sound sadistic, that may sound that I'm some kind of whatever, but I felt like I would have in some way been given Georgia her due and her justice. Because at that point, she hadn't been given any in my eyes. And now she has.
Right. And I agree with you. I agree. I mean, I won't say whether I'm for or against the death penalty, but I don't think anybody has the place to argue with a victim's family member or friend of a victim, or anybody that was in some capacity close to a victim of a murder, because, you don't know what they've gone through. I mean, you can read the details of somebody being brutally murdered and then say this person should spend the rest of their life in prison because the death penalty is unconstitutional or whatever, which
Yeah.
some may agree, some may disagree.
I invite you to go look at the pictures. I mean,
right.
You can go read the file on Georgia, and you can go look at the pictures of what this man did to her and read the full details and tell me if you don't think that man deserved to die. And he wasn't even given a sentence in her case. And to know that he made a man in a wheelchair watch his wife be raped in front of him. I mean, this man is a sick man.
100%.
Sick man. Sick man. And heaven only knows what he did to other people.
Right. And I've always wondered, what was he thinking in his final moments when he took his final breath? Like, did he finally get remorseful, or was he just like, I finally got away with it? I've always wondered what people like him think before they pass away. Like, I'm not really religious by any means, but if he is going to meet his maker or whatever he believes in, like, what are you thinking? Like, where do you think you're going? You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing. I told you what was at the end of Georgia's eulogy, right?
Yeah, I believe you sent me the memorial. I forget what they're called, the pamphlet for her funeral.
That she had already forgiven him.
And that's amazing. I mean, it's amazing, but it's very sad and disturbing at the same time.
Yeah, that Georgia had already forgiven him. The man that had already that we should forgive him because she already had. And that's a tough pill to swallow. And I'm a Christian. I'm a very devout Christian, or I try to be. I'm working on it. But when it comes to this, I get a little, my faith is tested. And um, that's a test of faith. And the you've got to, it's funny because when the person who answered the phone had the same name as my brother at the police station, I told him it was going to be a God thing. And it ended up turning out that we ended up with a conviction.
And I love that for your family. I'm so glad that you guys got, well, I'm not going to say closure, because nobody gets closure after their loved one is brutally killed when somebody's already in prison dying. But I'm glad that before Cecil died, he was notified that they knew he was the killer, and that that case had been closed, and he didn't die knowing that he got away with it.
Yeah, he knew, and he knew that he was being held accountable for it on the day he died, and that makes me happy. That makes me very happy.
Oh, I was saying that's good, because I didn't know that part. I was thinking that he died, thinking, nothing came of it.
Oh no, he knew every bit of it. He knew he was being charged. He knew he was going to be indicted. He knew all of it.
Good.
He knew they were going forward with the case. And what's cool, it's the same prosecutor that prosecuted the other cases. And they were ready for it. This was the trifecta for them. They were very happy that they were going to get to, this one was the one that had gotten away. And so to be able to close this out and close his career on this one was a blessing.
Oh yeah.
That after 30 years, this was, and like I said, I've been following this case in Idaho, and I think of all the detectives and how hard they work and how they carry these cases with them. And I can't even imagine how the original detectives feel after this thing is closed now, and finally knowing that this is done after 30 years, and knowing that it's finally over, and finally got the guy,
Yeah, that is really good.
And I think of, back to the original CSI guys and the job they did, the original detectives, the original guys who put in the legwork, who put in all of that effort and stuck to it and didn't close it out and kept that file. And, like I said, them taking the call, that first call, that crazy call to the police department, and all of those officers listening to your podcast with me on speakerphone, and he'd go, wait a minute, let's play it again. Wait a minute, let's play it again. Back it up. Wait a minute. Go get so-and-so. And they pull in another officer. And then they pull in another officer. And then they pull in another officer. And then they play it back. And then they play it back. And then they play that part back. And are you hearing what I'm hearing? Are you hearing what I'm hearing? Are you hearing what I'm hearing? Yeah. Okay, wait a minute. And then it was like, I think we have him. And I was like, and he's like, all right. I said, what do we do? And he goes, all right, give me a little bit. I'll call you back. And about 3 hours later, he called me back and he goes, I'm going to go talk to him. I was like, okay. And they went and interviewed him, and the rest is history.
And he actually confessed to the officers, right? When they went and visited him, like he finally gave up the details.
I don't know how many details they gave up, but he gave up enough that it was enough to shake him and prove that he was guilty, and enough for them to go forward with the case. I don't know the details of the interview that they had, but it was enough that they went forward with the case, and enough that they pulled the DNA and put it through the new stuff that they have. So they were happy enough with what they got, that and with the new DNA testing that he linked, they were able to link him with the new DNA testing. And like I said, it all started that night. So you helped solve a 30-year mystery. A 30-year
I'm
cold.
jealous.
Right. Yeah, I'm still mind blown to this day that happened, that this
30-year cold
interview
case
that I thought was just going to be, that hasn't been really played that many times on YouTube and other platforms. Like, I think it maybe has a couple thousand views, if that. I never realized that it would have such an impact on not only your family, but the Tacoma Police Department, retired detectives and current working detectives. Like, I I was just doing an interview with this multiple murderer, and I had no idea to the extent, the waves this would cause in a positive way.
Yeah. I mean, it's a 30-year cold case. I mean, that's amazing.
It gives hope to other cases.
It does. It really does. And it goes to show, and like I said, you never give up. You never give up. You never lose hope. And it's you just don't get discouraged, and you never know that one little detail that may prove a case. And I'm so proud of the work that those first detectives did, and that I know how hard it was for them. And I want to cry for them, because I know how gruesome it was and how hard it was for them, because all of them have grandmas. All of them have moms. And for them to walk into that scene and see what they saw, and to have to process that, and to have that in their memories for the rest of their lives. And it's like I told the officer that worked it this time. I told him, I said, I'm so sorry. And I apologized to him for what you're about to have to see. And he says, no, I'm okay. And I said, no, I really do apologize, because I do know what is in those files. And after he saw him, he said, now I know what you meant. And he understood. And and he said, they are among the most gruesome I've seen. They are that bad. And for her to go through that is unthinkable and unimaginable, considering the woman she was. And for him to have gotten away with it for that many years, and for it to finally be held accountable, is nothing but a blessing. You played a huge role in that, and we will, like I've told you before, we will be forever thankful for it. And it is, I get emotional about it, because I think of the police officers, I think of you, I think of the work that went into it in the beginning, and in the end, to get him. And I just so appreciate it. I so appreciate it. And just him listening to me on that first crazy phone call, it was just this. And it was a crazy phone call, because it was just like him calling in other officers, just like, come listen to this, come listen to this, come listen to this. And
you did a good thing, Andrew.
They were listening to you, talking to him, and he was giving up. And like, did he really say that? Did he really say that? Did he really? And they caught the Miss Georgia thing too.
Yeah. I'm so glad that they did listen, and that they actually followed up on it, because like you said, 30 years later, not a whole lot of, well, I won't say a whole lot, but there are some detectives and whatnot that just give up on cold cases, like 30-plus-year-old cold cases. This is never going to be solved. Why waste the resource and efforts? But I'm glad that
they took
actually did take this serious.
They took it seriously, and not only they took it seriously, the prosecutor's office took it seriously. I mean, it wasn't just them. It was the prosecutors took it seriously. And they wanted him. I mean, they were going after this guy. And it didn't matter that he already had 2 convictions and he was on death row, or sitting it out for life. It didn't matter to them. They wanted him. They wanted to get him. And they wanted him responsible for Georgia. And that meant the world to me. So that I give kudos to them. I give total kudos to them. So shout out to the Tacoma PD Cold Case Department. Big shout out.
Yes, they did a wonderful job, and I'm sure they did a wonderful job at first too. I'm sure that they just had a hard time proving it. 30 years ago,
the CSI department in 1993, the CSI department now, and to the cold case department. I mean, they rock. Literally rock.
And I'll be honest with you, you were the first victim family member that I've ever spoke to in this capacity, because I've always been not scared, but kind of nervous to speak to them, because, I interview convicted murderers. I know a lot of people don't like what I do, and they're like, why are you giving a platform to people like this? You should be giving platforms to the victims, family members. And honestly, it's a lot easier to track down people convicted of crimes than it is victim family members. But with people like Amy and other people that I have in my corner now, it's so much easier to track down victims' family members. And I'm actually starting to interview them more like survivors of violent crimes. Like I've interviewed Missy Jenkins Smith, who survived Michael Carneal. He was a school shooter in Kentucky. Rowan Richards, who survived the Aurora theater shooting, the James Holmes massacre, and so many countless other survivors and victim family members of other murder victims. And I feel a lot more confident now than I did back then speaking to them. And I feel like I'm not going to offend them, because you almost like opened the door and opened more, opportunities for me to speak to people like yourself that's been impacted by people like Cecil Davis. And
well, you can't offend me.
Right.
It's
and I thank you for that. I always have to tread lightly, I think, with victim family members, because I never want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend them. I don't want to re-traumatize them. That's why I didn't ask you about details about this crime, because I don't even know the details. I've never seen photos or anything like that, and I didn't want to have you re-traumatized, reliving it over and over again, because I'm sure you relive it all the time.
Out of respect for Georgia and the rest of my family, I'm not going to say all of the details, other than to know that it was extremely gruesome, and it just was extremely gruesome, and that's all that needs to be said. And it was bad, and he doesn't get to take her pride away. She gets to be respected in death. And so, all anybody really needs to know is that it was bad, it was gruesome, and in my opinion, he deserved the death penalty for her case too. And I would have hoped, if it were still in effect in the state of Washington, that he would have received it. And that's my opinion. But I'm from Texas, and I believe, I'm just one of those people. But and people may not agree with me, but
it doesn't matter if they agree with you or not. They have no say to disagree with you, because they're not in your shoes. You know what I mean?
Right. And I it is what it is. It's just my opinion. And I know that there are people in my family that don't agree with me on it, that would just want him put away. You know, there are members of my own family that don't agree with me, in who had just wanted him put away for life and just wanted him away where he couldn't hurt anybody else. But I'm mean.
Right. And you're entitled to your opinion, and
I
that's
just don't, you know, there are members of our family who would rather he just have had life and not death, but
right. And they're entitled to their opinions just as much as you are,
absolutely.
and that's your guys' truth at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And we don't quarrel about it. We just go on, and that's, you know, as long as he's not hurting anybody, and he's no longer hurting anybody, and he's probably burning in hell. I don't know where he's at. I don't know what his last thoughts were. I don't know if he came and asked God for forgiveness or not. That's a good question. Do you know if he became religious in prison?
Well, he would say God willing sometimes to me, but I don't know if that was just a facade or being fake. And he would say like God bless this person and God bless that person. But I got fake vibes from him all around, to be honest with you.
So he never became like a born again prison prophet or anything like that.
I mean, it's very possible, but I wish I would have asked him that in the interview, to be honest, because I don't really ask many people that because I'm not religious myself, but I should start incorporating that into my format because I'm very curious now. And of course, there's a lot of people that commit homicides that go to prison and all of a sudden they become Christians. Like, there's a case here in Washington State named Jack Spillman, and he's the worst individual I've ever laid eyes on and shook hands with. And his case was actually popularized on TV as of like 10 years ago. And as soon as this case was making the rounds on the Crime Watch Daily and this and that, all of a sudden he just conveniently became a Christian and people stopped messing with him. They were threatening to kill him. He was getting threats of being beat up. Now all of a sudden he's a Christian, and he's friends with a very high profile serial killer that's doing 2 life sentences here in Washington and multiple life sentences in California. I believe he has multiple life sentences in California, and
he only has one. If it's the same person we're talking about.
oh, okay, yeah, one life sentence in
Yeah.
California. And
He was convicted of 5, but it merged into 1, and it runs concurrently with the ones in Washington State.
right, and I'm sure people could read between the lines and know who I'm talking about. But yeah, Spillman is a prime example of somebody that I'm not going to say capitalizes off religion, but hides behind it to save his skin so he doesn't get killed in prison like Billy Shamir did, and Jeffrey Dahmer, and so many countless other serial killers have been killed, just like Robert Pickton recently in Canada, who was the pig farmer butcher, and he got killed as well.
There's a female, I can't think of her name here in Texas, that did it. I don't think it was Darlie Routier. It was, I think it was the lady that killed her 5 kids.
Oh, Andrea Yates?
Yeah, I think she's the one that became all religious.
Yeah, she's, well, I want to say she was very religious before all that because her husband, Rusty, he said that like the doctors were telling him that she could suffer from postpartum depression,
Right.
and that they suggested her not having kid after kid after kid, and he said, God willing, if she can continue having children, it's God's plan for us to continue having children, and it doesn't matter if she has postpartum depression or not. God's going to take care of us. And unfortunately, she did what she did, and she's in a mental hospital, hopefully for the rest of her life.
Yeah. And how did that work out?
I know there are so many that try to use it to get out of it. And it's just, I was curious if he had any, I know he never had any remorse for anything he ever did. And the closest he came, or any sign of it, was when he said about Miss Georgia. And I heard a little bit of something in his voice, or I thought I did. And that's the closest I've ever heard of anything, because he wanted to talk about it. Like he might have had a little bit of a regret there in his voice. And he called her Miss Georgia. Now, Miss Georgia, and the way he said her name was kind of a loving way, the way he said it, and just sickens me. But it was a very familial way to say it.
Right. And I've always wondered if that was regret meaning remorse, or regret meaning he was gonna eventually be linked to that case. That's what I've always wondered, if it was like, oh man, they know that it was me, or I'm truly sorry for what I did to her.
I think I don't know. I would hope that he was sorry that he did it to her, and only because I have a hope for humankind. But he was her first. Or, well, I don't want to say he was the first. She was the first among the three that we know of.
Right.
She was before the other two that he was convicted of. We don't know what he did before that. If he knew her, which he did, he was neighbors with her. He delivered papers to her. He had a relationship with her, a real relationship with her. The other two, he didn't. I mean, he had a drug relationship with Trap that he met the night before, right?
Right.
And Couch was a chance meeting, right?
Yeah, I think that was just a robbery gone wrong, to be honest. It might have been premeditated for all I know.
Followed her up the stairs, stomped her, and right, threw her in the house and tied the man up, and just horrific. But
right.
Both of those, my point is, he had a relationship with Georgia, and he didn't with the other two. So when he says Miss Georgia, I think he had always called her Miss Georgia. I think that may be the one murder I would hope that he had some kind of regret on.
Right. Yeah, I really hope so.
Because you asked, is there anything else you want to say? And then he said, well, about Miss Georgia. That's the one he brings up. Well, why did he want to talk about that one?
Right, especially if he had nothing to do with it. Exactly.
Right. Why did he want to talk about it? He needed to get it off his chest.
Or relive it openly.
Yeah, that's a possibility too, of reliving it through speaking about it, knowing that it would be on a public platform.
You're right. I hadn't even thought about that.
I don't want to give him the benefit of the doubt too much.
I hadn't even thought about that. Did he know you had a podcast? I mean, how much did he know about you, Andrew?
He knew I had a podcast. He would always call it a broadcast. Most prisoners call it a broadcast, and I'm like, yeah, okay, pretty much same thing. I mean, but he knew I had a podcast. He knew that I interviewed people like him, people convicted of violent crimes, and I told him I interviewed survivors of violent crime and professionals in the mental health and law enforcement field, which is what I always tell people. Long story short, this is what my podcast is about, because I could go on for minutes or hours about what I do and who I interview. But yeah, he knew that much about me, and he knew that I had been corresponding and visiting with convicted murderers since 2010, and this was, God, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. It was one of the first 30 or so episodes, I want to say, of Unforbidden Truth. And like I said before, Criminal Perspective, we had interviewed him, but the audio was so terrible that we weren't able to use it, and did re-interview him for Unforbidden Truth because something special had come out of it.
Well, in the second phone call that you had with him, didn't you mention that you had talked to me or talked to the family, and you had questions about Georgia?
You mean during the interview?
Yeah, because remember, you had called him back at trying to get him to truly confess.
Yeah, I honestly, I hate to say it, but I honestly don't remember. I would have to go back and listen to it, but it's possible I did because I
You
mean
sent
I
me a
didn't.
recording of that, and I should have re-listened to it before this, so I could remember it. But I want to say that you had like confronted him about, well, the family really thinks that you did this or something like that, and then he was like, I had nothing to do with it or something like that, and he says, well, I told you, and you shouldn't tell anybody or something like that.
Right, right, right. Yeah, if anybody comes back and
But at the
talks to me, I'm gonna tell them that you're full of shit or something like that.
Yeah.
He said something to that extent, and I was just thinking to myself, like,
Well, you just
how
did tell
stupid are
me.
you? Yeah.
You did just tell me. It's like what I tell you is
Right, especially since like even if the interview was deleted from everywhere on the World Wide Web.
it's like you just
y-
told me on a jail telephone that you just did this.
Right, exactly.
If the
And
cops
and
come
inmates
after me,
tend to
I will
forget that.
not.
Like people are like, "Oh, they record the calls, but they don't really record them. They don't keep record of them." But they do because you see at all these new trials that phone calls are used and as evidence in a lot of these murder trials or even just like attempted murder or sexual assault or anything like that. I mean, they use phone calls against you. I mean, it's proven evidence. I mean, what's more damning than your own words and a basic confession to your friends or family members?
What was funny was that in that first one, he was sitting there and he had kind of admitted it, and you said, "Well, that's going to be between you and the Tacoma Police Department."
Right, right. Yeah.
I'll let that be between you and the Tacoma Police Department.
Yeah, he definitely was not the smartest man,
And then
to walk
later
the
he
earth.
comes back and he says something like, well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the truth, and it'll be just between you and me. And
Right.
it's like, ah, you are such an idiot. Oh,
Right. Yeah, he was very dumb to say the least, and I would love to research his case more and know if he truly was developmentally disabled because I did read that he had a low IQ and he was in he did tell me he was in special ed classes when he was younger, but I
I
don't
don't think
know.
he was, though. I really think he played that. I really do think he played that up because he is a lot smarter than people gave him credit for. I really do. I, I,
Right. Yeah, of
I,
course.
I really do think he played that. And I think that he was not as affected as what people thought he was. And um, I think he was just a very violent man. And I think that he had, I mean, I don't think he was as affected. I think he was a man who used a lot of drugs, and all of his crimes were drug related. And he admitted that. He admitted that he was high on both of those murders. And I'm sure he was doped up when he did Georgia.
Right. Yeah, I can only imagine.
He doesn't even remember doing it, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of killers I talk to that are high or drunk when they do it, it's like it adds on to their high or drunkenness, like it stimulates them more than they're already stimulated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, if they're doped up on whatever, they're not going to remember. I mean, they're going to be in a state of whatever, and they're not going to remember everything. They're going to be so wound up. They're in a rage, and he's not going to remember everything he did.
Right, right,
He admitted it was a drug thing gone wrong with Trap,
right.
and it was about
Though on the
drugs.
same hand, if I would never kill anybody, but if I was to kill somebody, I think even if I was so high, like to the point where I was almost overdosing, I think I would remember if I killed somebody, at least bits and pieces of the details, because that's something so personal taken somebody's life, you have to remember some details at least, if not all details. I mean, like Sam Little, for instance, America's most infamous serial killer. He was painting pictures of all of his victims, and he had 89 victims or something like that. And it's just crazy to remember their faces and facial features and everything like that. It's something you can't forget. I would imagine, even if you were just sloppy drunk or just
I'm sure
doped up
he
on
remembers
everything.
parts of it. I'm sure he does. I mean, he says he did 7 or 8. I mean, and then when you pushed him on the names, he couldn't remember faces or names or details.
Right, right. But I'm sure if he was shown a line like photos from detectives and whatnot, if he was being truthful, he probably would have been able to point them out easily.
Oh, I'm sure. Or time periods, or I think in the very beginning, like when, and for some reason this is sticking out in my head, that they had thought at one point that he might have done some in California for some reason. But, and I don't know why in Northern California, and I don't know if that's true or not, but something in my head is sticking out that the first detective had told me that he might have done some in Northern California and Oregon, that there were some unsolved cases that they were trying to link him to there. But I don't know if anything ever came of that. But, and those
Right. It wouldn't surprise me.
But they're, like you said, if he's thinking 7, maybe they're 14.
Right. Yeah, of course. Especially being drugged up. I mean, things get blurry when people do drugs from what I hear. I've only ever done anything like drinking alcohol and smoking weed, so I wouldn't know, how it is being on meth or heroin or fentanyl or whatever and not remembering or not doing what you were doing during that time of, committing crimes or whatever.
I've watched videos of people on it, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So if you don't mind me asking you, how did your grandfather feel after this homicide took place? And you feel free to not answer that if
He
you
was
don't
already
feel
dead.
comfortable. Oh, he had already passed?
He had already passed. He had passed a couple years prior. The other grandpa I was talking about was on my maternal side. So my grandpa Ahrens had already passed. So Georgia was living alone when this happened.
And how did your other family members react that were related to her? Obviously, it was negatively, but do you remember the impact that they
It
felt?
was hard because we were all. It was really hard because initially, especially on my cousin, they put out that it was a young white man. Well, my cousin would go over and mow her yard, and so they looked at him as a suspect. And so they questioned my cousin up one side and down the other, which was really unfair. And so he got looked at as a suspect, which was really hard on him emotionally. And he was only 20. Let's see, he's 1 year younger than me. He was only 21 at the time, I think. So, his good deed was getting him, questioned as a suspect in a murder. And, they questioned him up one side and down the other. And, which made it, really hard on him because, he had been going over there and mowing her yard and trying to help and, and so that was really tough on him. And, they called and questioned, my dad and asking his whereabouts and the whereabouts of my brothers and where they were. And, and of course they verified their locations. And, but, so everybody got looked at as suspects first, family first gets looked at. And, then I don't know how soon they clued in on Cecil. but they could never really pin him because two guys went and pawned or tried to pawn the rings. And that's what threw them off of Cecil, was the two white guys trying to pawn the rings. And that put them as the lead suspects because they had the rings. It never occurred to them that somebody could have given them the rings to pawn, which I'm sure Cecil did. Said, hey, go, gave them to him for drugs, traded them for drugs, and they went and pawned them. I'm sure that's what happened.
But right. I'm sure he probably sold them to somebody for some dope or something like that, and then they went to go pawn them for more dope or money for dope, something like that. I mean, that always happens. People steal things and trade it for dope or trade it for money for dope.
Yeah. So the rings got pawned by two white guys, and that's what threw them off of Cecil. So, so the initial, and I showed you that, and I don't know if you've put it up or not, but the original sketch for the suspect was a white guy with shaggy hair, light hair, was the original suspect. And that was their lead suspect. The original suspect was a white guy with shaggy blonde hair, because that's what the neighbors told them they saw coming out of the house. And guess who the neighbors were? Cecil's sister and Cecil Davis.
That's terrible. Doesn't surprise me, but terrible.
So those were the, that's who their suspects were. Yeah. So it was hard, and it was tough because it was 2 weeks away from my wedding, and so it was kind of a bittersweet kind of thing for us getting married and thinking about her. And my mom stayed. We were in the middle of the wedding and preparations for it. And so my dad came up for the funeral, and it was a very small funeral. And her sisters were there, and my dad, and I came up, I think it was just a few weeks after. It wasn't too long after. And because we had to go through the house, and
that's the worst and hard enough as it is.
And we had to they had thankfully cleaned, and we had to get the things out, and I think the hardest part for me was seeing my wedding invitation there. And she had left me, I was a journalism major, and she left me a old typewriter, her typewriter. And she was a secretary, a professional secretary, and she had a vintage typewriter, and she left that to me. And it was something I treasured for many, many, many years, and it ended up getting stolen from me, which I hate to say that, but it ended up getting stolen from me. But it was something I treasured very deeply for many, many years, and it was something that it was just such a gift in my life for many, many years. And but it was so bittersweet going through the house and being there and knowing what had happened. But it was tough. But we got what things had belonged to my grandfather and her sisters. I can't remember which one was there. She was there as well and helped kind of get everything sorted. And it's a tough day.
I can imagine. I went through doing my dad's house when he passed, and I didn't have all of that additional negativity added to it. So I can't even imagine.
But there are fun stories, too. So lots of fun stories as well. Lots of fun stories too. So, but like, I guess one of those things is she forgave him, so we're supposed to as well. But she is one of those people that would have absolutely forgiven him the moment she died. I'm sure that she was absolutely shocked. That's the thing. It's just I cannot believe the shock that must have been on her face when it happened, because she is just such a absolutely loving, kind person, and she absolutely would have let anybody in the door. I mean, had he come to the door and he said, "Miss Georgia, can I have a glass of water?" She would have said, "Absolutely, come on in." And that's all he would have had to do. And he could have walked straight in that house, and she wouldn't have thought twice about it. And I know that's probably what happened. And he had his way with her. But she deserved a hell of a lot better for somebody who treated the world so kindly and gently and beautifully, and to have such a horrific death. It just seems so wrong. So wrong. In the end, there was justice served, and we are, like I said, for it to be closed now after 30 years is just an absolute miracle. It's an absolute miracle.
I agree. I'm so glad that I unintentionally helped, your family and the Tacoma Police Department close this. I would have never dreamt in a million years that I would help solve a cold case homicide dating back almost as old as I am, because I was born in 91 and this happened in 93, as you said. So I just
You were 2 years old when this happened.
Yeah, I was 2, and that's what's so crazy about it is, and there's really not much on the case, to be honest, because back then they weren't really
No, there's a
covering.
blip. There was a blip in the
Right,
paper.
right. Especially since it wasn't considered quote unquote high profile. They weren't really covering cases like that in the 90s, and even they probably weren't doing that until what, like 2001, 2002, when I guess the internet came around and there's actual like archival footage and documents and so on and so forth. But then you go back hundreds of years and there's newspaper clippings related to cases that weren't really that high profile. So I don't really understand that either.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing for it to happen. And I'm kind of curious a percentage of how many, what the rate is of cases that get closed, cold cases that actually get closed at the 30-year mark. you know, what is the probability of that even happening? I mean,
Actually, I just looked up the rate of cold cases being solved are slowly declining. It says soon less than 30% will be solved per year. About 35% of those cases are not cold cases at all. And 45% of violent crimes in California were, 45% of, in 2020, about 45% of reported violent crimes in California were solved. So that means about 55% of violent crimes in California weren't solved in 2020, which is ridiculous, especially considering there's cameras on every street corner and hidden cameras everywhere nowadays and DNA evidence and everything like that. That still is kind of mind blowing.
What about Washington State?
Oh, let me see if I can find the statistics. There are thousands of murder and missing person cases that are still unsolved in Washington State. Of the homicide cases in Washington from 1965 to 2019, 28% are currently unsolved. So that's about 1 in every 4 homicides from 1965 to 2019 are unsolved, which is very alarming and very scary.
I just think it's absolutely amazing. I mean, just from an outsider's perspective, even if I were not involved at all, I think it's just absolutely, utterly amazing the probability of us even being closed. Just how it happened is an amazing story.
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%.
Just crazy.
Yeah, very, very surreal. Well, we've kept you on here almost 2 hours. Is there anything that you would like to wrap up with or end with that you'd like to talk about, whether it be
honestly, just to say thank you. I mean, in Andrew, I just need to say thanks. Cecil Davis was the devil to our family, and he was a man who brutalized a woman who was an angel to many people on this earth. And Georgia was beautiful. She was vibrant. She was lively. She was independent. When she was 50 years old, she traveled the United States on her own on a train. She was utterly unique and strong-willed and lovely and totally unique. And to think that I don't want her life to have been defined by how she died, but by how she lived. But I do want to thank every one of those CSI workers in 1993 who took the time to do their job right, to save the evidence so diligently. The detective that worked the case so hard. And for the detective who took my call last year, for you who took my call and listened to me to the wee hours of the morning that night, and for you who made the call to Cecil and talked to him and got him to talk. And if you guys have not listened to that podcast, go listen to it and listen to him and hear it for yourselves and hear what we're talking about. It's interesting. But most of all, go hug your family. If you still got a grandma, call her, love on her, hug her, call your family, keep in touch with them. And not just by text. Call them. Let them hear your voice. Sit down and eat with them. Spend time with them. Most of all, love them. That's all.
All right. Well, I think that was great, and I also want to mention that I'm probably going to go down to Tacoma this summer and hopefully find her grave. And if it's dirty or overgrown or anything, I would love to clean it up and do anything and everything to polish it and make it look like it's brand new and super clean.
That would be awesome. If I happen to be there at the same time, because I plan on going this summer too, I would love to meet up with you, and hopefully we can meet up with the detective in the case, because I plan on doing that while I'm there.
That would be amazing, actually. I would love to do that. I would make sure I would take the trip and everything. As much as I hate Tacoma and how crime ridden it's become, I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, because I plan on doing that. I actually tried to do that the last time I was in Tacoma, and we were not able to do that, but I have actually stayed in touch with him, but we have not been able to. The last time I was in Tacoma, I was not able to hook up with him, but I am going to try the next time I go. So if we happen to be able to make that work, we can try to make that.
Well, I'll clear my schedule for you for anything. Once you're down here, I'll make sure that I make it happen.
Oh, I feel so special. I appreciate it. I truly do.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Yes,
Amy, do you have anything else to add?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for being here.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you so much. And we'll obviously be in touch and all that good stuff. And we'll remain in contact probably for the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. You're always welcome here.
Thank you. I appreciate that.